Um, Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today with another Artist Talk session with Trish Shwart, a talented Victoria local artist. Trish's recent work focuses on the connection she feels with the natural world, with an acknowledgement that she is part of a society that threatens it. The climate emergency is a very real consideration in all of her work. Her interior architecture experience developed an interest in place, which continues to be central in her art practice. She is a graduate of the University of Manitoba and the Emily Carr College of Art. Trish has shown her work across Canada and in Australia. Also, she has been actively involved in Victoria artist-run centers. This artist talk will be followed by a 20-minute questions and answer period. We are pleased to be showing a great collection of Trish's mystical landscapes at Winchester Galleries until June 16. I would like to invite Trish to start her talk. Trish, would you please share your screen if you like and share your PowerPoint with us? I will mute myself and turn my video off.
Okay, I'll just say hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who came on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I'm going to just start a little bit about talking about me, which it won't be long, as just a paragraph that I've lived in Victoria for about 30 years. I have 2 undergraduate degrees, one in interior design and the other in fine arts. And both of those degrees are from programs that require the students to put their work up and be quite vulnerable as their peers and their instructors provide a lot of feedback, and it's not always edited. And so you develop both a really thick skin, but I realized I also developed a learning style, and that is how I tend to develop my work. It's become my process, is asking for feedback and thinking about how that works or doesn't work for what I'm doing. Let's see here now, what is happening? Sorry. Oh, okay. These are the topics that I'm going to cover today. The whole talk will be about 15 or 20 minutes. And I was going to talk about my process in one particularly difficult painting, because people are interested in that. So here's the oil pastels. I don't know. Here's the first one, A Walk in the Park. It's in Anahita's office right now. It's one of a series of paintings that I'm starting to explore this idea of working in a sort of a cinematic way where you're looking broadly across the landscape rather than through sort of what a photograph might show you. So there's more in it than you would see in one go. I don't know how many people know, but oil pastels were developed only in 1950 for Picasso by the Sennelier company. Picasso apparently came and asked this art supplier if he could invent something that Picasso could use to very quickly figure out whether or not an idea he had could work, rather than using oil paints, which we all know take forever to dry. Of course, pastels also take forever to dry, but they're much more versatile. For me, pastels are like a form of drawing. I feel like it's more intimate than using a brush because there's no intermediary. There's just my hand and the material, like the pastel. This is another one called The Sun Came Out Over Westmere, and it's a diptych of, so it's 2 pieces of paper that are glued together that hopefully you can't see where the gluing together is. And it's about going to Iceland in the days when we could do things like that and seeing the sun come out over one of the islands. And one of the things that I think when I'm using the oil pastel, a friend of mine who happens to be on this call said that what we really need to do is risk delight, because that's hard to do. And when I'm using oil pastels, I realize that is actually something I'm doing because they're so fun to use. Oh, there it is. This is another one that I've got. It's called Hiding in Plain Sight. And this is the first of a series of paintings where I tried to embed something in the drawing or in the painting that you don't see at first glance. So it was an idea of sort of rewarding looking. And so here, you might not have picked this up, but there's a deer here hidden in the bush. And I like the idea that there's things in the painting that you find later, just like if you're reading a book and later you think about something that a sentence meant. Again, oil pastel. I think this is the last oil pastel that I'm showing, and it's called Together in the Garden. Actually, it's a picture in my mind of two women, one who's a gardener and one who isn't. And I wanted it to read so that it's just a series of blotches of color, blotches not being the most correct word, and that later, as you look at it, you see more things. You see the house, you see the figure, but that there's something in the painting that immediately feels like there's a feeling to it, and then later you find out what the content is about. We've talked about keeping the questions to the end, but one of the questions that I often get is how I use color. This is one of the paintings that I'm going to talk about. It's called What It Looks Like on Yelp. It's not very big. And in my opinion, when you're using local color, I feel like for myself, I've lost an opportunity to create an emotional connection with the viewer. If I make the grass green and the sky blue, everybody knows what that is, but I sometimes think that if I can put a different kind of color in, that there's a mood that gets changed, and people still really do understand what the painting is about. The reason that this painting is called What It Looks Like on Yelp is because during these last several 15, 16 months, like everyone else, I think I wanted to go somewhere. I couldn't go anywhere. And so I started looking at advertisements for resorts. And on the Yelp website, you can see pictures taken by people who've actually stayed at the resort rather than what the resort posts. And I always love those pictures even better. And this is one from the back of a resort, and it doesn't have the same sort of feel that the picture that the resort posted. So I like that sort of contrast between what they say it is and what might really be. This is another painting where I've used color to modify or change your expectations of what you're looking at. And also because a lot of times, as Anahita talked about in the beginning, I'm thinking about we're nature, we're looking at nature, and how is it that we're changing what we're seeing, or how will we change it if we keep going the way we're going? And then the other idea I had was, if you look at something, if you've got like, I don't know, a headache or your foot is sore or something, it changes your perspective of what you're seeing. Doesn't have to be a landscape for that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that kind of experience with this filter of the pink over the landscape. This is another one called After the Fire, and it's part of this series that I'm actually still working on. A few pieces are at the Winchester about what's going to happen to the world if we keep going the same way we're going. And I'm using kind of happy colors here. It's not a really dark, I mean, it's dark, but it's not dark in the sense that it's all black and white and gray, as a way of sort of talking about hope and helping us to think about things are beautiful even when they're not necessarily going the way we particularly wanted them to. And then this painting is called They Still Hadn't Found Their Way. And I started this series, it's part of the same series as After the Fire, but I had this idea about trying to look at the land from a higher perspective. And so this one is like that. And I was thinking about Edward Burtynsky's Manufactured Landscapes. I don't know how many of you know, he's a Canadian photographer, and he takes these absolutely stunning photographs of places where there's devastation. And I was looking at a photo of a smelter site in Sudbury, and it's a very beautiful looking, but when you see that the water is bright red, you know immediately something isn't quite right. And I like the idea of playing with what would happen if I changed the water to this sort of a citrus color, and how would it change what you see when you look at the painting. Okay, and so then this is the last part of the presentation. And I've just entitled it One Tricky Painting, but really it's this painting which is in the gallery, and it's called We Used to Sail. It's in the place where we used to sail, with the idea being that the world might have changed. There's still a lot of beauty to it, but what I'm going to talk about is the process of getting to here. So I'd just done this painting and I wanted to get even higher up, more of an aerial perspective than what even this is. So I started this, and this is the stages that the painting went through. So first I started with the idea that I wanted it to be kind of an island perspective, like where we live on the West Coast. And I often start with opposite colors for where I think it's going to be. So I had the idea that the water might be blue or green or something that wasn't orange, like I had, not yellow like in the other one, and that the islands would be some kind of a green. But then this is what I started to do, which is almost embarrassing to show it to anyone, but I had this idea that I wanted to create this sense of a lot of urban life going on. I didn't like what I did, so I changed it to this, and I was still very unhappy with where the painting was going, although I could see that, and I think it's partly learning to work with an aerial perspective for me. So then this is a kind of a midway painting. I got this idea about doing the waterfall in there, and it just got really busy. And I don't know, those of you who are on the talk who've been to art school, they often talk about how you have to kill your babies. And that's like, I loved the waterfall and I thought it was so fun to paint the waterfall. And of course, it's the only thing you can see is the waterfall. So it just doesn't work for overall for the painting. And this is, I often take a shot at the end of the day of what I've done, or at the end of a couple of days, depending on, because this painting took 2 or 3 months, depending on how much progress I've made or haven't made. Many times it feels like I'm going backwards. And then I put the painting up in my dining room, the bad version that you just saw here. And I started to see that it could look quite differently if I let go all my preconceived notions about what had to be in the painting. And I painted out these basic shapes, and then I kept working on what it would look like. And this is the painting. Let me see here. I think this might be the final version of the painting right now. And it was when I finally realized that I needed to pay more attention then to some of the smaller areas. So I started to work in more detail, but not very particularly, not with a tiny brush or anything, so that when you look at any one part of the painting, there's this sense that something really interesting is happening. So this is part of the top left corner. Here's more of the top left corner. So there's parts of the painting that have been sanded away and parts where there's different paint applied and different layers of thick or not thick paint. And then here at the bottom, I had a whole sort of city painted at one point, but I took it right back to this and then added some red where you can see that it feels like a city, but it isn't described particularly only as a city. And that is the whole process. Is there, I think I'm just ready for questions now. So
thank you, Trish. Wonderful. So, yeah, there's a message from Connie. I love hearing about your process. Thank you, Trish. It's inspiring work. I'm wondering about what you are wanting to say or question through the work.
I'm asking some questions of myself as a member of, as I said, a society where I see a lot of things happening, and I don't really see myself as an activist in the sense that I would go out there and activate, be political that way. But I am interested in more subtly asking some questions about what are we doing with our natural landscape, and also being aware of and conscious that there's a lot of people who maybe have a stronger connection, ownership to the land than I do, but I also still feel that it's beautiful and worth saving. And so this is the way that I'm proposing to ask those questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Another good question is how large are the pastels and what kind of paper are you using? This is actually great because we saw the pictures of the paintings, but people don't know the scale of the artwork. Maybe would you like to share your screen again and show some of the works and maybe
yeah, let me see here. I could get back into the PowerPoint.
Sure.
Let's see. Okay, so let's see here. View. Let's see if I can go back. So there, the pastels, I started off when I first started working in pastels quite small, but then I found that the larger they got, the easier that it was to make something that didn't look like a cute little something. So this particular drawing is 30 centimeters by 120 centimeters. So 12 inches by 4 feet. So it's a long, narrow band. So it's 2 pieces of paper that have been glued together on a wood panel. And I think this one is probably 20 by 32. And then this one is just a standard piece of paper. So maybe 20 by 28. And then this one is, I think it's 30 by 40 and it's directly on a wood panel. Mm-hmm. So they're quite large.
The second part of the question was, what kind of paper are you using?
It was a real process of trial and error with the pastels. I started off, I'm ending up, the answer is I'm using Clairefontaine paper, which is designed for pastels. And it's a fairly new paper that's made, I think, in Australia. You can get it at Art World in Victoria. But I have probably tried every kind of pastel paper that you can get in Victoria. And that's the one that is it takes the mark the best. And you can slide it around if you want, because oil pastels can be either a direct mark or a movement. But, and sometimes I iron on the mark so that I put a parchment paper and iron over a part of it. And then I go over it again with more oil pastel. I don't know, is that enough?
Great information, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So yeah, so Trish, where do you find your inspirations? This is just a very general question, but do you have any specific artists that you get influenced by, or where do you go to look for inspirations?
Over the last couple of years, my inspiration has just come from being in the world. I used to work almost exclusively in a figurative way, so there were always people in my pictures. And I started to feel that they were so imbued with a kind of a weight as soon as we as humans see another human in a picture, that it was hard to use the painting to express a lot of other feelings. So I would say almost everything is inspiring. For about a year and a half now, I've been going out doing plein air drawing once a week, except for not December and January because it was way too cold. I could tell it was too cold because I got from the Carr to where I was going to set up and I was already shivering, and I knew that was the end of the plein air for a little while. In terms of artists that I'm following, I would say every 2 weeks I have a new absolute favorite artist, which is maybe a little, I don't know. It is though, but like this week, if you want to know who I'm interested in this week, I'm really looking at William Kentridge a lot because I really like the way he's been doing some drawings. And I also like Anne Kipling's drawings. That's this week. If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, it would have been someone else.
Interesting, yeah. Terry's asking, I wonder how you decide whether an image is going to be pastel or paint.
I don't know how I know that. I mean, sometimes I will do the same thing. Not sometimes, I will often paint the same image many times. Like I might do it 6 times before I feel like I would ever show it to anyone, or I have worked out the kinks in it. So sometimes I'll start in pastel and then I'll do an acrylic and then do maybe another pastel. So, I mean, I throw a lot of my work out. I would say I throw 80% of what I do in the garbage almost immediately or within a few months. And I feel better as soon as I know no one can ever see I did that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's ruthless.
It's good because then you get only the work that you feel okay about.
um, Luke is asking, how do you know when an image is complete? Um, it's a very good question.
Well, usually when I'm looking at something, some little thing will bother me. I'll think that doesn't work over there, that color is wrong, or I don't like the way the line is. So when I finally look at something and nothing else comes to mind that I should fix, that's usually when I stop. So
Mhm.
I hope that's helpful. I mean, they do take a long time to do that. I'm not a super speedy worker, or I am, but I throw a lot out. So then I'm not.
Oh, Chin is saying that interesting that you mentioned Kentridge, because I believe there is a sense of erasure in your painting, which leads itself to the dreamlike quality,
Yes, I'm really big on this thing that I think of in my head is there and not there. And the first time I ever cottoned onto that was looking at Edward Viard's work, where he has figures kind of almost embedded in the carpet or something, and you have to really find them before you suddenly realize what the painting is about. And so I like the idea of taking things out and then leaving some remnants that they were there in the painting, but not necessarily bringing them fully back. So thanks, Chin. That's true.
Mhm.
I never would have thought of saying it, but it's true.
Interesting, thank you. Amy is asking a very interesting question. She says, you seem quite adept with computers. Do you ever use computer programs to conceptualize or sketch your ideas?
Always, every single time. Like I work on every painting. When I leave the studio, then I put it on a little app called Pixelmator, and then I work on it every night. Almost every night I work on them. And it's really great to use an app because there's no materials. You're not spending really almost any time because you're working quite small. So I can try really crazy things on the app on a painting, and a lot of times they make me go in places that I wouldn't have done if I needed to get a brush and some paint out. I mean, then I do that, but you can try 10 things in the course of half an hour and see right away if they're going to work or not.
Great, yeah. Terry's asking, what are your favorite source materials for researching artists?
Well, I like Instagram, but I also just like looking at different artists who I've got a pretty good selection of art books, and then some magazines have really great artists. I'm trying to become more knowledgeable of artists in the UK and in Australia, not just Canadian and North American artists. There's a whole different perspective about what is important art on some level when you go to Europe. And I like that.
Very good point. Con is asking, how important is it to you that the viewer understands or gets each painting?
Well, I don't think I can be prescriptive about what the viewer is going to get from the painting. I'm hoping that they resonate with it on some level, and then they're going to put their own sense of what it means into it. I mean, maybe it's not right to compare it to a book or to a piece of music, but it is art. And so, you read a book And sometimes I'll read a book and I'll think one thing about it, and I'll hear an interview with the author and think, oh, I missed the whole point of the book, or I got that, but I didn't get this. So uh, it's not, it's important that they get something, but not necessarily what I am putting into it, because we're going to have such different life experiences.
Exactly, yeah. A great question from Sandy. Do you use music or any other art forms as inspiration?
I would say I am inspired by reading. Like when I read a lot, and sometimes there's an image in a book that, doesn't have a real image, it's just words, but it's something that makes me want to then think, how would I put that into a painting?
Mm-hmm.
I used to want to paint like Paul Simon sang, but that seemed really hard to do.
Well, yeah, it's actually related to a question I have, because you consider environmental issues, and also your architecture background gives you an idea of the place. So how do you work in between these two different concepts? How do you bring the architecture, your architecture background, and then you work on the environmental issues? How do you work in between?
I think it's tricky. When I went to design school and worked as a designer for a number of years before I went to art school. And after art school, I spent a long time trying to not know about design, which really I think was a mistake, but I felt like I had to get rid of it. And so the same with sort of thinking about the environment and architecture. I'm trying to allow them to be beside each other instead of vetoing one voice or the other, but they are often competing with each other, and they compete initially in the paintings, I think, too. Like that painting I just showed, that tricky, I called it the tricky painting.
Mhm.
There's way too much architecture in it for you to get anything in the beginning, right?
Yes, very interesting. The next comment is from Harp. You risk the light. Great concept. Is there anything else you feel you risk?
Risk,
Yes,
like the light. Oh, the color, you mean?
yes.
Well, one of the things I'm actively thinking about, but I don't know if this is sort of too technical, is when do you draw something and when do you allow the paint to create the shape so that it's implied, So even on that painting behind you, I'm using quite a bit of spray paint there as a way to think about what Chin said, to erase what was painted below it, and then allowing some lines to still come up, but not all of them to be there.
Mhm. And sorry, it was risk delight, not light.
Oh, delight. What else? Well, that's the other thing I risk. It was more response, but the delight thing is really tricky. I mean, it's not something that I think I've been thought to think about a lot, but as I get older, I think, why wouldn't I want to be delighted as often as possible?
Mhm. Yeah. So you mentioned you work on a few pieces at the same time. How do you devote your time to each painting, and how do you um, like work a painting to a stage and then move to the next one? How do you manage that?
Usually, actually, the paintings kind of tell you. Like sometimes I'll start something and I'll just finish it within a couple of days. But I mean, I have a painting downstairs right now, which I'm starting to think of as my nemesis painting, which I've been working on for about 2 months. And today I realized that the way that I'm going to finish it is going to be a little bit at a time. And so I'll work on it, then I'll get mad at it and turn it against the wall and work on 2 other things. And then I'll wake up in the morning and think I have to go back into it. So it's not a thoughtful, in terms of planned, scheduled way of working on the paintings. It's just what they, in some ways, insist on from me.
Very interesting. Yeah. So if there's any other questions, please type your questions in the group chat, so I can wrap up the whole question and answers part with my final question. Maybe I can wait for a couple seconds. Yeah, so I think the questions are done. I will ask my final question. Trish, where do you see the future of your work, and where do you see your artwork in the Canadian and global framework?
Well, where do I want to see it, or where?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I would like to think that the work is going to continue to get better and that more people will see it. And I mean, one of the people I think about is Rose Wiley. I don't know how many people know her, but she's a British artist who, I read a thing, like, she's very well known now, but when she was first started painting or trying to exhibit, I know she submitted to like a community art fair for something like 20 years and was turned down every single time. And then a gallery from the Netherlands saw her work and they saw some value in it. And I mean, she's had I don't expect this, but she's had like a solo show at the Tate Modern, and, you know, David Zwimmer has just picked up her work. And so I'm not saying I'm going to be there, but I feel like the sky is the limit, and I don't want to put a cap on where I want my work to be.
Great. Yeah, well, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for putting this presentation together. It was amazing. And thanks for showing your process on the last painting. You showed all the stages that it went through. It was very interesting to see that how hard you tried to get to the point that you feel satisfied with the work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone here for joining us today. Thank you, Trish, for taking the time, putting this presentation together. The exhibition A Mystical Approach will be on display until Wednesday, June 16. As you know, the exhibition is a group show of works by Trish and Teresa. Our Zoom artist talk with Teresa is already on YouTube, so you can have a look at that as well if you like. The gallery is open from Tuesday to Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. If you live in Victoria, please visit us for to see the exhibition in person. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Trish.
Thanks, Anahita. It was great. Bye-bye.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.